Hey everybody, welcome to Skagit County Track and Field Podcast, episode number 14. You are live at the Jumpers Roundtable. We are going to talk anything and everything horizontal jump related, vertical jump related, and maybe, just maybe, we'll dive into a little pole vault as well. Our county legend with us today is Mr. Glenn Springer, longtime track coach, teacher, and athletic director at LaConner High School. He was nice enough to join us and spend some time and talk some jumps. Glenn, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, this is quite a program you got going on here. This high tech stuff.
We appreciate it. It's actually just an excuse to talk more track and field. So mission accomplished. So Glenn, before we kind of get into the specifics of jumps, can you give us your quick 2-minute drill on your history, your makeup, both as a competitor in high school up until you were coaching, and then maybe even talk about what retirement has in store for you?
Well, I started pole vaulting. That was my event in the lot across the street into grass clippings. Didn't get too much better than that until sub-district track meets, when they actually had some foam for us to land on. But I did vault through high school and ended up as a county champion over there at Cedar Willie's Pit, actually. And ended up at Western in a teaching program up there called Teacher Corps, where you spent the last year in a classroom with your coursework under your arm. And the 6th grade teacher that I did that with at LaConner, Rudy Leander, chose me out of about 6 others that applied for LaConner and other districts. He took me because I could coach track, and that's what he was doing. He had 5 athletes at the time. Then he retired shortly after that. And so I pretty much had a set of hurdles and a crushed brick track. And one of my classes after a couple of years was a special ed class, and we had a project on campus where we poured 2-meter curbs, like the parking curbs you see in all the parking lots. And we poured enough of those and lined 400 meters and changed the track to 400 meters at that time. So it was quite a job, but at least I had something to run the grader along when I drug behind my Toyota truck and kind of got the track rolling. We ended up with hovered around 20 to 30 athletes at a time. Small groups compared to you guys, but it was always fun to go to the county meet and find that our kids could compete pretty well. I don't think I spend a little time now in retirement with guys that are into sales of some kind and different jobs. And I couldn't have had a better job. It was fabulous. So I enjoyed building that program up. At the beginning, I was it, so I had to do all the events. And as far as pole vaulters, that was back before they required the $8,000 pit for them to land in. So I went down to Mattress Factory in Marysville and got a bunch of chunks of foam and put them in net bags, and we had a pit, and it worked for a number of years. Had 3 vaulters over 12 feet in that, but then we just couldn't do the event anymore. We didn't have that kind of money. As far as my strategies for figuring out workouts for 14 different events, and kids that shared many events. Excel spreadsheet was my friend, and I spent a lot of time getting things organized so that the 2 hours of turnout were useful. One thing that I started right from the beginning was a handbook that had goals for every track meet in it, along with any previous athletes that had, the top 25 in every event was listed in the back of that book so kids could see where they are and what others that have a school record, for instance, started when they were freshmen. And so then they could see from there. But that handbook was something that I wouldn't let them on the bus unless they had it with it filled out with their goals for each event they were competing in. And it ended up being a very valuable tool. And probably one of the most enjoyable things to do on a bus ride to a track meet was to be able to sit with, and after a while I had a couple of coaches so we could split it up, but I'd sit with each one and go over their goals with them on the way to the meet. And it was a joyous time from my point of view.
And Glenn, how long were you the head coach there in total?
37 years.
Holy smokes, 37. Cool.
But then in 1999, they had a matching grant with the county parks department, I think, helped us fund all-weather track finally in 99. But that was 20 years of, or no, 25 years of dragging Toyota trucks and beams behind it.
That's great.
Making it level.
Well, one last follow-up before Jake takes it away here. How many county track meets did you host out at LaConner through your 37 years? Do you remember ish?
Well, our turn came around and we hosted, I'm sure we did 5 or something like that after we had the rubberized track.
Mm-hmm.
But then we did more than that because for some reason, Anacortes couldn't host a few years. So we did it then too. They had a beautiful track, I thought, but they didn't have grandstands. So that was kind of the problem, I guess. So
that's right, on the hillside. Jake,
that was back when the county meet started out at probably the Edison Tavern with Erickson and Dave Sawkeld and a few others. And legal pads, sorting, lane assignments, and humorous conversation. That was good, but it's a little quicker with athletic.net and in the track programs that they have now for sorting.
Hey, it may be quicker, but that's still my favorite thing is the seed meeting. I love the fact that we still have a meeting to like go through that whole process, have a conversation. So the way in which we input everything might have changed from those notebook pads, but man, we still have a conversation and still talk about things. I think that's one of the best parts about, again, one of the long-standing track meets in the state. So that's pretty awesome to hear that it was still happening there. So
yeah, except
I think we should.
We can't drink beer at our seed meeting like the old guys could.
Well, we need the electronics.
That's right.
We can't go to the tab. So yeah.
Well, we did bring a computer to the upstairs room at the farmhouse, I think once for a seating meeting, and that worked out pretty well.
You know what? Sometimes you guys just did things better. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say that. Thinking smarter.
Back when they we couldn't afford one, but they did have some seating programs, and one of my vaulters and I spent many hours over a few weeks making a seating program that did print out the program for the county meet for one and the district meet for a whole bunch of years. And it was 28 pages of basic. That was a project, but it worked for a while before we got into the computerized programs.
I was lucky enough to coach, with Don when I first started, and so I was able to go to those seed meetings back. And the first one I ever went to is at the Alger Tavern, and I remember that night, and I remember the one at the farmhouse too. I remember being upstairs in the farmhouse, and that was a big deal because we used note cards for the other ones with a pencil. And you would say, how many hurdlers do you have? And you'd put up your fingers, and we'd count, and okay, that's 3 heats. And then all right, who has a 15-5? And then you'd write it down, and then everybody would get it down, and we'd get like 8 people in, and then it'd be like, oh, wait, I forgot, I have a 15-7. Then we'd have to erase everything and go back. Those seed meetings took hours.
Was there an auctioneer involved at any of this? It's kind of
it could have been. I just remember Don Erickson many times saying, well, now I've got this guy. Well, what's his time? He's still running. He'd say. And that was for the 200 meters.
Well, Glenn, you'll be happy to know that Excel is still widely used at LeConner as part of the track program. So I've not seen a track program utilize Excel quite like I did when I started working with Pete at LeConner. So he still uses them.
They're all Glenn's files. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah, they've aged well.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. Well, I could listen to some old stories forever. These are amazing. But we'll move on and transition into sort of the roundtable portion of it. So I know Pete just jumped on, and so Pete, what I kind of gave everybody heads up was just to kind of give us a rundown of what your jumps program looks like integrated throughout your track program. So just kind of a quick summary of how much time you spend each week on jumps. What does that look like in terms of technique and workouts? And then, if you have a really great sort of, specific workout or technique drill that you want to jump in there with, that would be awesome. And then I think we'll go into kind of just asking some questions about things that you have that you want to hear from other coaches, or things that you do that you say, hey, I'd like to get some feedback on. So I think we'll jump into that if everybody's good with that. We have some jump coaches and we have some head coaches, and so I'm going to start with Kevin, because you're a head coach and you're also the jumps coach. You were on one of our previous episodes kind of talking about that. So start us up, and then we'll kind of go from there with each person kind of jumping in. And Glenn, wherever and whenever you want to throw some things in, please do so. But Kevin, kind of, if you can kind of start us off with that first sort of question that we have.
Little bit different maybe than some other schools, because Rob, our pole vault coach, is he's only there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So those also tend to be our jump days. We usually run, some type of a sprint workout on Monday for everybody, divided by, long sprint, short sprint. And then Tuesday is going to be our primary jump day. And so what we usually will do with the vaulters is they'll come to me first, or we'll kind of look and see, are they a primary vaulter that, does some jumping on the side, or are they a primary jumper? One of the things is, early season, especially, a lot of plyometric drills and a lot of, kind of form stuff. They're a little bit at a disadvantage in the fact that, we don't have turf. We have grass, which it's nice because it's soft, but it's a little bit unstable as far as, it's not a completely flat surface. So, um, it's kind of what we have. I try to do as much as I can to keep kids from just the pounding. There's a lot of pounding involved. So a lot of the drill stuff that we do, especially when we're talking about, plyometric type stuff and bounding, that's a lot of that's early in the season. And then as the season progresses, you usually have a lot of issues with shin splints, and we'll have issues with, it's basically a lot of it's about preservation. And so to really not spend as much time on very, very short amount of time um, on the plyos so that they can get any kind of technique we can get. They never do full jumps. Anything we do is always going to be a lot of times maybe 2-3 strides to the pit. So it's really trying to break down the landing part. We'll spend a lot of times, so we'll do a jump day. If we have a meet on a Wednesday, that's the other thing. That's most of our meets are Wednesday. So that's also kind of a difficult thing because now you're jumping the day before a meet. And so it kind of depends where we are in the season, but sometimes we'll have a good solid jump day on that Wednesday or on that Tuesday before a meet, knowing that, they might jump a little tired, and we certainly will back off on that as the season progresses, especially as we get to postseason. But a lot of stuff early on technique. We'll take the kids, and a lot of it is just the jumping and talking about the knee placement, how they take off, how they land, how they extend the landing, and things like that. So we'll do a lot of that on really, really short approaches and even some standing stuff. Um, and usually, especially when we get into the early season before we even have meets, we'll do that on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Um, Triple jump, long jump, I break it up into a lot of times, if we're doing a drill where we're talking about a takeoff, we might do something where if you're a triple jumper, I want you to take off of your whatever leg you jump into the pit with, your takeoff leg on that last one. That's the one I want you to use. If they're a long jumper, obviously they're using that. So I try to get the triple jumpers in kind of in the same, but a lot of times I'll even have the long jumpers, they'll be done, and we'll go to the triple jumpers, and I'll just work with them after the long jumpers on some specific stuff, especially middle phase and things like that. We also do a lot of stuff with pads. Like we use our old high jump. We have some big, huge old high jump pads. And so we'll have the kids jump into those, because then they don't have to worry about any, really focus on, what they do in the air and really getting a full extension. So there's no fear of, oh, it's going to hurt landing in the sand. They can completely extend and what it should feel like. We'll even use sometimes, if they're not vaulting, we'll use the pole vault pits, and we'll even use I inherited a springboard, like a gymnastics springboard, and so we'll do use that, and it really helps take away the pounding, because they can do a really solid pound the foot on the takeoff, but it's not hitting solid ground, it's hitting a nice springboard. So just a lot of stuff to half the battle, I think, sometimes is keeping them healthy for the whole season. And so we'll try to utilize anything we can to do that.
Now, Kevin, are you guys exclusively outdoors? Do you have an indoor space that you use?
It's not really. Our baseball team has our field house, and they've got batting cages in there. Our wrestling room, our softball team has batting cages in there. Our tennis team's in the gym. So we really don't have a spot. I have done, sometimes we get those really nasty days We have our hallways in our 3-story building are really, really, I mean, they're long. They're probably 300 feet long. And so we'll do we'll get steps in there and basically like check and make sure no one's in the rooms, but we'll line everybody up. I'll put a board, I'll tape it down, we'll put a tape measure. So we'll try to do some stuff like that. I've trucked some of our foam pads into the cafeteria before and used the springboard and had them jump into that indoor, or we'll use our cheer mats to do some bound drills and stuff. We only if it's really nasty. If it's just pouring rain or really windy, we'll do that. But most of the time, we're unfortunately outside most of the time.
You're outside. All right.
Hey,
All right,
Kevin, I was curious on that. When you're choosing, what's your makeup of your jumpers? Who's, if you got the split between triple and long, what's your typical workload for a jumper event wise?
Yeah, it's so hard because of the fact that the amount of pounding that they do, and you guys know this as well. You're utilizing your athletes, they're relay runners, they're jumpers, they're sprinters. So you kind of have to. I would say that we don't have as many triple jumpers as we used to. Um, Most of my long jumpers for a long time were triple jumpers as well, just because it's kind of like we've talked about on earlier podcasts, it's an event a lot of people don't do. And so, you can get some points by having some triple jumpers. And so I'll take some kids and try to get, especially for the county meet, try to get them, hey, let's work on some triple jump technique. Some of it is, if I like my triple jumper, especially our boys, if I can get a guy that's, a 6'2", 6'3" boy that's, got some long levers that can have some big long bounds, or a really strong kid, those kids can be they might not be the fastest, but sometimes they can kind of power through it and do all right. So I'll kind of every once in a while I'll try to find a taller kid to put in there.
And sometimes they might turn out to be Thomas Stoltz,
And sometimes they might be Thomas Stoltz. Yes.
Yeah.
If you get lucky and you get the guy that, the thing is, I found, so we had a girl a few years ago, Alana Handy was her name, and she was a star volleyball player, and she was a kind of a 400, 800 runner. We do a test, and you guys, I'm sure I'll do these as well. And one of the tests that we do it's kind of like we call it the Tiger Heptathlon. We have them do a bunch of different things that aren't really events. And one of them it's a 5 jump test. So it's you get one step and how far can you jump in 5 bounds. We'll have the tape measure out. And Alana it was the first week of practice, and she was a junior, and she went out and she'd never jumped, and she did 5 bounds and she beat every one of our boys. And I was like, what the heck? Where did this come from? So we threw her over to triple jump, and she ended up going, she went 35 feet, I think. And went to state and placed in state 2 years, but I would have never known that she could do that. So sometimes you do find, but she was pretty strong. She was a lot of times, most of our kind of the typical sprinter, really, really quick, kind of thin. Sometimes I just will not put them in triple, even though they probably could do well in it, just because it beats them up so much. And so a lot of times they won't be triple jumpers for us. It's more, sometimes it's the kid who's maybe not as fast also. Like I said, you can kind of power through a triple jump more than you can get away with not being as fast in that more so than you can in long jump. So maybe my, boy that's, pretty solidly a 18-foot long jumper, because he just, he runs a 12.5, 12.700, but he has some good pop. I might make him a triple jump.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I think we'll go to Johnny, because you're kind of in the same boat where you're coaching and you're jump coaching. So, kind of what does it look like for an athlete in terms of the program? How much time you're spending on technique, and I think one thing Kevin kind of brought up, which I would love to kind of hear too from everybody, is, when do you do full jumps? How often do you do it? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So for us, we kind of had a different philosophy going into this year. And so I'm excited to see how it works. But essentially for us, everything revolves around speed and the sprinters workouts. And the reason I say that is because all of our jumpers, whether they're long, high, triple, and in some cases vaulters too. We're in a weird boat because a lot of our vaulters are also our distance runners, which is a weird problem that we've had the last couple of years. But they're always going to do the speed workout. So for us, in terms of a sprinter's world, we only have 3 different types of workouts. We have speed days where we're after more neural adaptations. They're short in distance, they're high in intensity. Then we have active recovery or technique days, and that's where our jumpers get most of their work in. And then we have lactate days where we're looking at more specific endurance or speed capacity stuff. And I'm looking at our schedule now. We only have 4 of those planned, but we also use our league meets as lactate workouts too. So how does that translate for jumpers? In a typical week on a Monday, we would have a speed day. And the jumpers and the sprinters would all be together. They'll go through their warm up, they'll do the speed workout, and then the long jumpers and the sprinters will vacate and they'll go and lift weights and do some plyometrics. So that's where all the long jumpers get their plyo work is on those speed days. And then we're going to take the triple jumpers separate, and that's where they'll do their plyometrics, but it will be more specific to triple jump. So they're bounding, their phases, they'll work on that stuff. So that's kind of the only time that we separate our long and triple jumpers. So that would be a Monday. A Tuesday, we'd work all technique. And for the long and the triple, I mean, the only technique stuff we're talking about is approach, takeoff, their flight, and then their landing. Like those are the only 4 things that we really spend a lot of time on. The high jumpers also on Tuesday, we'll separate after our warm-ups and stuff and go see Coach Wires. And then usually on Wednesday, we have our meets. That's pretty much the only time that they're doing full jumps. And we use our league meets as a way to train for that. So, a goal for our first league meet might be, make sure your approach is dialed in. Our goal for our second league meet might be, something around takeoff. So we'll try to use those as learning lessons just because we don't have a lot of time. Thursday would be a technique day as well. And then, Friday is usually our lactate workout. And on lactate stuff, we don't do anything other than that specific workout. I think the difference in philosophy for us, like Kevin was saying, we would spend different sections of the season working on different sections of their jumps. And now we're going to spend, we're not going to do it that way. So like, for instance, we used to do, first 2 weeks, we're only working on approach. And then kids will say, well, what happens at the meet? And we'll be like, just go jump. You'll be fine. We'll work you through it. And then, the second, third of the season, we're working on more takeoff stuff. And so now we're going to work on everything simultaneous, but we're also going to have some emphasis shifts, I guess, would be the difference there. So we'll still stress things at certain parts of time in the season, but that's not going to be the only thing that they work on. We want to try to incorporate a little bit more full awareness of their event and what they're doing.
All right. And then, Brad, can you kind of talk about your thought process as a head coach? Because you've coached different things, but you're a distance coach. So in terms of trying to make sure you have enough time for your athletes, for the week, how do you work with your coaches as not being directly connected with some jumps? And did you coach jumps before? Did you
High jump?
High jump. That's right. And if you want to talk a little bit about like high jump, what your ideal like kind of high jump week would look like, because that to me is one of those that's really tough, like pole vault, because it's such a different movement because you're going vertical and not horizontal. So like, how do you see that kind of working into a schedule to be successful for athletes?
Sure. Thanks for saving me on that, Jake, because I can't talk about the vertical jump or the horizontal jumps at all. I apologize. But my jumps coach couldn't make it today. I look at the high jump. It's actually that we do a heptathlon as part of our like inter squad meet fundraiser type thing at the beginning of the year, and obviously high jump is part of that. And the kids all kind of see that high jump looks kind of fun, so a lot of people want to do it. So my philosophy has kind of been to kind of actually put kind of the stop sign on a lot of the practices for high jump. We only practice high jump maybe once a week for the first third of the season for those people that are really kind of interested in it and maybe newbies, and they kind of weed some people out so they can maybe focus on other events they might be interested in. And then as the season rolls along, I only practice like tech days with high jump maybe once a week, twice a week during the second half of the season all year long. And I try and get those kids over because, Glenn can probably and Pete can probably attest to this. With the small school, you've got a lot of kids doing a lot of different events. I guess we all probably do. So I've got high jumpers that are triple jumping, long jumping, and relay sprinters, what have you. So I call them over at the second half of practice. I mean, they're not fresh, but it's kind of things have kind of died down at that point, I feel, and they're able to actually concentrate on the event a little bit more. And we work a lot on the approach for the first half of the season on that 1-2 days a week that we have. Usually it's a Tuesday or Thursday. Until they get that down. I mean, it's what 90% of the high jump is on the ground from approach to takeoff. Once they get that approach down, we really work on some takeoff drills until they get confident. And then it actually kind of whittles itself down where I kind of have finally a small group of high jumpers that are really dedicated and want to learn the event, whether they be, top shelf or not. As long as you're invested in listening to what I have to say and wanting to improve, then you can stick around. Then kind of at that point, mid season kind of on, we at some points, we Kevin mentioned that it was a spring box. We have one of those too that I'll pull out once in a while, and we just kind of have a fun day and let the kids rip on that a little bit, get really high in the air and practice their layout a little bit and practice jumping at higher bars that they will never see. I don't know if this is answering your question, but a lot of our practices are just strictly revolving around the approach. And then as the season gets kind of midway to the championship part of our season, we're really looking at takeoff points.
No, that's great. I really appreciate that. Glenn, I'm gonna kind of throw it back to you because I'm really interested to hear this because we've thrown a couple things in here, and I don't want to limit what you had access to, but based on what you were telling us, sometimes equipment or training equipment that we have now, I mean, it's not the same. What, if you can think about it, I'm putting you on the spot. So what did you feel like was one of the most effective drills that you had for your jumpers, whether it was the pole vaulters, whether it was triple jumpers, long jumpers? What was the thing that you felt like you got the most output out of with those kids? And this kind of goes with like where Pete and you were, because I mean it's a small program at LeConner, so you're coaching multi event athletes, but was there some drills that you felt like, hey, these were the ones that I felt like got the most out of my athletes?
Well, we coach the same number of events, just have like 2 or 3 kids involved in them instead of 12. some of the better drills. What I had to be was efficient. So our plyo drills would be over cones on soft grass, because we can injure athletes really quickly if we want to, or try not to. But our plyos over cones would be left, right together, or right, left together. And at the same time, you're being able to assess those kids that could handle a triple jump rhythm. And the other important thing is the weight room. And I happened to be in charge of that and built it. So that was my baby. And if the kids on the track team were in there at the time I had it, after a while, another coach would be, or another teacher would have a weight room. But I printed out prescriptive programs so I could give them to them and take it with them to the weight room. So that was, we got more out of that than anything. And then we didn't have any hills to run. And the way to teach kids to run efficiently and properly is to run up a hill. Well, it was quite a ways from the school to do that. So we welded up 4 or 5 sleds and put weights on them and made harnesses to run 30-meter sprints with the sled. And that probably solved an awful lot of hamstring issues and quad issues after I started doing that. We did that on power days, 2 days a week. I'd always start, most of our meets were on Fridays, so I'd start on Friday and back up from there and have technique days Tuesday and Thursday, power days Monday and Wednesday. The drills that are most helpful are ones that kids like to do. And so we'd pull those sleds in relay teams and get in and out of that harness as part of like the handoff. And I had a spreadsheet with everyone's time on sorted from slow to fast, and I could put together some teams that were pretty competitive. And that way they weren't just running, but they were running hard. And you can't really get injured while you're dragging a sled. You can get injured when you don't have a sled, but if you don't have that strength behind you and the muscle tonus, then you can get injured. You mentioned earlier about what do you tell a first-year coach or a new coach? I'd have to stress the fact that you've got to get to the administration and make sure that they're all for everyone attending as many in-service clinics as possible. And that's so important. There's so many things to learn that you just hit the ground running with when you get back. And drills that kids enjoy for jumping was, like Kevin mentioned, about using mats. That way you can save them. They love to jump onto a mat from a takeoff spot, but you got to be careful about taking off on a hard board all the time. So a lot of times we didn't have a springboard, but I'd get a small trampolines, those 4-foot trampolines, and you could do a lot of work for high jump and long jump off of those and save their shins. We did, when I did have vaulters, we did some vaulting underwater, which is kind of a fun thing for the kids, and it's the only way you can do vaulting slow motion. So we did.
You got to tell us about that. I don't know.
Oh, I'm yeah.
Oh, well,
absolutely.
If you get access to a pool, and we'd go to the Y sometimes, or we had access to Potlatch. They used to have a pool over there. And all pools have a great big long handled net to scoop stuff out of the water or off the water or people out of the water. And if you stand on the side of the pool, put that pole down tight to the bottom, then your vaulter can jump in, hold his breath at about 3 feet from the bottom of the pool and pull through and up and over and push off toward the surface of the water. A lot of fun. And the only way you can experience that, unless you go up in a spacecraft.
Glenn, I think if I did that drill, I would leave something in that pool that you could scoop out with that net.
That's why you're selective in who you invite to that drill. And now I know you wouldn't be there, but you could hold the pole for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then another good drill for vaulting is when you're in the gym. A lot of times you can't do much, but one thing you can do for vaulters is put that pole against the corner of where the floor meets the wall, and then put a white towel or some kind of a cloth about the size of a towel and stand at the edge of that and grab the pole and just bend the heck out of it and then drop onto the floor, and it'll throw you along the floor and you can turn over onto your stomach as you're pushing off from the vault. Kids love that one.
While we're on the subject of vault, I know that our vault coach, Coach Larson, he, especially on rainy days, he'll bring guys into the mat room, and we have two cables coming down with gymnast hooks on it that he does some work on, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. And then we also have the old school PE ropes, that you try to shimmy to the top. We have 2 in there, and he'll have kids kind of similar to what you were talking about, Glenn, over on one side, and they'll take like a 3 or 4 step approach and then swing on that rope and try to get inverted on the rope before they swing to the other side. So those are 2 drills I've seen him doing there quite a bit.
Yeah, they're fun, logical, great workouts. Well, there's just so many things.
Hey, I kind of got a question, because I think we all bring our confident thing that we're used to into whatever event that we're doing, and I think all of us have coached jumps, but Johnny, I think you're the only real jumper in the group, maybe. But with throwing, like javelin was my deal, and like rhythm's a big deal in that. So when I've coached jumps, I've brought that, hey, especially for triple jump, try to make sure they got some rhythm to those. Long jump, I mean, counting, it's that approach work of counting and trying to get some rhythm. Even in high jump, does that play a role in any of your guys' approaches, or how do you train that?
Yeah, I think that's huge, Pete. Like Brad said earlier, if you had a stopwatch from the time someone did, whether it's long, triple, high, or even vault, and you started it from when they first started moving till they end, the approach is 80-90% of that. And so, logically, you should probably spend 80 to 90% of your time teaching that. I know for us, I don't know about you guys, at least in terms of long or triple, we generally start kids off with a 7 stride approach for long jump, and for triple, we go 6 until we can see that they can handle that speed going through all 3 phases. So kids got to get used to doing that. I know that in the last couple steps of the long jump, I know that in high jump, mostly with most all your approach, that heel to toe starts to enter rather than running 4 foot to toe off like you would see in a sprinter, is really hard for some kids to grasp. So teaching that heel to toe concept, I think, is big. The rhythm, I think, is huge, especially in high jump, because you're not slowly accelerating, you're finding a rhythm, finding a good speed, and you're also curvilinear on that. You're moving in a non-linear line. So I think all those are big. One thing I think that's going to help us this year is we're going to put in a 3-stride check mark. So the third stride for a kid in their approach, at least in long and triple, because I think that's where you lose consistencies in those first 3 strides. If they're over or under that mark, that can be a clue for them to adjust the second half of their approach.
Yeah, I think sort of the biggest things there too. I mean, it's so tough sometimes because the long, it's so explosive that you just want to have controlled speed to an explosive movement. And if they can do that, then you can kind of work the stuff in the air. If they can't run fast and be explosive on a long jump, it's kind of detrimental. There's only something you can do. The triple and the high, and I don't know pole vault enough because I know it's super technical, but I'll just speak on the high and the triple. But because it's such a as you were kind of talking about, like a rhythm coming in, like there's a foot position and an angle that goes in the high jump. And if you don't have that angle in that foot position, it doesn't matter as much how explosive they are, because you're limited essentially if they can't get to that point. And so that J curve is just something that's nothing else in track happens with that. Nothing else goes on in track where you have to run in an angle essentially at that pace. So that's such a unique thing to teach. And so that's why that approach is so unique. And then with the triple, it's so hard as you're coaching it to not to emphasize the first phase as being out and not up, and the importance of that outwardness and not that upwardness, while maintaining that speed. So it's a really, like, when you're developing those drills and kind of going through those things and emphasizing those things and communicating those things, I think each of those, those different jumps kind of have like a specific purpose and focus and point that you want to, this is what I want to lead on. And so I think identifying those things and then identifying the drill that emphasizes that the most is so critical. When you're kind of going through that, that's a fun part of it. And then again, you add pole vault, and it's a whole other thing.
Kevin, question along those lines for Kevin and Glenn in particular. Have you ever had someone with just day one beautiful second phase and triple?
I've had
from day one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very rarely.
All right.
But I can kind of identify those doing cone drills with plyometrics, left, right together, right, left together. You can kind of see who's got a rhythm that could go far.
And Glenn, what do you see when you're like, this is some person I can work with?
If they're coachable, if they know how to use their levers, they just naturally do. Triple's pretty goofy with the arms, but some kids just leave the ground and know where their body is, and that's very exciting. But where Johnny was talking about in the beginning, that approach is everything, or 90% of everything, because if you're off, you're going to scratch, or you're going to fail at the high jump, or you're going to really get hurt in the pole vault. I mean, you have to be within an inch or two of takeoff for all those events to do them properly. And kids don't want to spend much time on that approach, but you got to get some kind of a competition going on where they're making bets about, I'm going to be on that mark right there. And one thing that was beneficial of the old crushed brick track was you could brush it down with a broom and then leave a recording of where your feet were when you made your approach. And that was pretty handy, but not as nice as the improvement of a rubberized surface.
And with Pete, what you were saying is, one thing is, I think what Glenn was talking about with cones, there is a lot you can do. I can tell when a kid, once they get that bound and they feel it, and it takes, some kids just never will. I've had some amazing jumpers that, as you'd lament, God, if they only had a middle phase, then what could they have done?
Yeah.
But,
jump, step, jump. And you're like,
yeah, it's 2 feet. It seems like it's just like they don't even get off the ground. But there, and you mentioned, Thomas Stoltz, and I remember vividly when one of the things that we did with Thomas was we would have him, jump, and I've kind of done this with kids too, and is use a cone, and you have them take off, and then you kind of have a goal, have them do their middle phase, and you're only going to do the first 2. We're not going to go to the third one, or I'll even use the pad so that they're going into the pad at the end, so they're not doing the full jump, but have them, and I'll do it on grass, have them do their first phase and then their second phase, and put the cones where they landed, and then try moving that second cone. Okay, now get to this one. Now get here, and really get them with that feeling of really trying to extend it. And we'll use, like, I've got some, either you can use like the mini hurdles as a barrier, so they have to get their knee up. But we've even had them go up on top of one of our old pits, because it's about, our old high jump pit is probably 2 feet, 2.5 feet, which is pretty scary how thick it really wasn't. But it's about the perfect height to get them to have that phase, and then they jump up onto that pit. They don't land on their butt. They're using that as a barrier so they can actually see that.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I got a couple direct questions. First for Brad. Can you kind of give us a rundown on high jump approach? I know that that's the most important thing, and when I was coaching high jump, that was the thing that I struggled with the most, was just initializing what that approach should look like in getting a kid's steps. So, we've all stood arm's distance from the bar and ran backwards, but some kids run U shapes, some kids run L's, some kids run skinny J's, some kids run fat J's. Like, do you have any advice for the high jump coaches listening on
measurement versus, like,
the
other thing too, like,
triangulation,
like,
and
triangulation, measure out.
I'm just curious, Brad, how many
Sue was on
800 meters
she could probably
approach on
address
that?
some of this, but I don't have any. It's just repetition after repetition after repetition. I've set, you mentioned the bar, the takeoff point, measure, finding that point, and then maybe setting cones 16 feet out from that, making sure the kids don't go too wide. But it is the most important part of the jump and high jump, the approach. Every day when we do tech for a high jump, the first thing that we do is we do 10 full approaches just as a warm up, and the kids, they don't do a jump, they just scissor into the pit. I think that adds to the consistency. We spend a lot of time just finding that mark where it's going to be a J and not a hook, or not a, they're not going to cut the turn at all. I struggle with it too. It's a lot. I don't have any answers for you. Sorry.
do you have your kids? obviously you'll adjust, but for the most part, take the same numbered steps or strides in their approach when you first start out?
Yeah, we emphasize a 10-step approach. And a lot of the kids tend to stay with that. And it's not something where they bound into or walk into. It's a standing start and it's 10 steps from there. Last year I moved one of my gals up to like just an 8-step approach, just because she was spending too much time running, and it confused her. But 10 steps is pretty the norm for us.
Yeah. The other thing that I see come up quite a bit, and I struggled with this a little bit last year. And Kevin, you can jump in here. Do you have your kids that cross over and do both triple and long? Do you have them, like if I have a left-footed long jumper, do you have your triple jump, the same kid go right, right, left, so that last phase is similar to his long jump, or do you switch it, or do you just kind of say it depends on the kid?
Yeah, that's always a question, and the kids always ask it too. What foot do I use? I would say more often than not, I would say use the same foot you take off with in long and triple, just because then they're used to the run where they take off.
Right.
But I've had it where kids absolutely can't do that. Like they can't triple jump off of their long jump foot and vice versa. So it really is what is the most comfortable thing for them. Like what is the thing that is going to make your run consistent, where you are going to, nail it every time. And like Jake said, you're not going too high, you're going out instead of up, which is opposite of what you want to do in the long jump. So some kids just can do it because they understand the body control, and some kids can't. And so, it's a lot of it's what works. I have switched kids like mid-season when it's like they get kind of in a rut, and so let's try this. Let's switch it up. Let's go off your other foot, and there's no way I can do it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they're worse. When it works, then you're like, oh yeah, see, I knew what I was doing right there.
We were talking about what foot do I jump off of. That's one of those as a head coach that doesn't necessarily coach the jumps but I'm in the, trying to make the orbit, right? And I'll go stand next to Coach Souders or whatever and the kid comes up and goes, "What foot do I jump off of again?" It's just
Do you still do the close your eyes and push them, and whatever foot goes?
Yep.
Push them hard too, really hard.
Yep. Whatever foot goes back, that's what you need to jump off of. So.
I always tell them if they're going to dunk, and you guys always want to dunk in basketball. So what foot?
Well, none of these kids dunk anymore, Kevin. So we don't have those kind of athletes. So.
We don't either. We have a lot of kids that can try to touch the rim.
Which one are you going to touch are you going to whisk your fingertips on the backboard with? That would be great.
Yeah. If you think about it, Pete brings up a pretty good point. Like as a thrower circulating through, and you hear that question from the jumpers, I don't know if I've ever went around.
Coach, what hand do I throw with?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Which hand am I? It's like, well, Jesus, come on.
Yeah. Kevin, kind of go on that. Like it's funny because who should really be on here is Yvonne, which is our fault.
I thought I might see
her on there. I know. And but that was the biggest thing going into Maddie Lagerway's senior year was switching her foot on the triple jump, because she was her starting foot on the long and triple were the same. But we had just kind of gotten to the point where like she needs to finish with her long jump foot. Like she needs to finish with the dominant foot. And it was one of those things. And again, credit to Maddie, being an athlete, being an amazing competitor. But it was one of those things. We let her go like 2 meets, not changing it. And they were like, we're going to ask you to do this thing. And if it doesn't work, we've banked 4 weeks where you're not going to do it with your, dominant foot as your takeoff foot. Like it's not going to be the same. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We can go back. And credit to her, she was like, all right. And first 2 weeks was a disaster because it was just so, neurally.
Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah.
Yeah.
And we were at Kashmir, and she hit it, and it was just one of those things where I was like, all right, well, one, it helps to coach an athlete like Maddie Lagerway. Second, I really do think that is the way to go if you can do it. But it was funny because last year we had two really talented triple jumpers, and Johnny and I had this point where we're like, this is what we think it should be. It should be opposite of what their long jump should be, and we should practice that. And it was such a good conversation to just go, you know what? We're going to let the athlete talk to us about it and have a conversation about it. And one of our athletes, it was what they needed. And for the other one, it was like, nope, it needs to be my long jump foot, needs to be my first one. And we're like, all right, that's the way it goes. And they were seniors.
Let me dive into that a little bit deeper. So the kid that switched from last year ended up breaking the school record. And the other kid that switched for a few weeks and then decided to go back was my son. And I'm dad, not coach, so I don't know anything anyway. So that's that's why.
Yeah, but I think what our point was, like, hey, from freshman, sophomore on, this is kind of the philosophy we want to go with. But like, if they're seniors and we haven't been doing this, then we don't want to push it and make sure they go it. Your son also made state, so it's not like he crapped out completely and didn't do anything. So just to kind of point that out. But yes, the other one, that if we were writing a book on whether or not our thesis was correct, we're definitely going to add the kid that broke the school record into our evidence.
As coaches, we have a lot of power. We can coach a kid down pretty easily. If they're naturally going to do really well, we can really work hard at coaching them down. Case in point, the county meet when Cornelius and Mike Ritchie were jumping, and coaches from Mount Vernon and Burlington were watching Ritchie take off. And he always took off 6 feet away from that standard. And these coaches were saying, your kid's never going to make that. He's not going. He can't take off that far from the standard. And I just said, well, you just watch. I tried to get him up closer to that, but you watch him hold his height for 6 feet. And he did. He was one of those speed jumpers that just got up there. And we got to just listen and watch our athletes more than we think, especially when they get to be juniors and seniors.
So Glenn, that leads me to kind of the last point and wrap this up. And you've given a ton of advice, which I really appreciate. But we kind of wrapped up the last roundtable with what's that thing that you would tell a new jump coach, a first year jump coach? What's the advice you would give them? And then we'll kind of hear from everybody on the roundtable on that. But Glenn, if you can kind of springboard, and like I said, you've already given us like the 3 or 4 nuggets that have been amazing. But if you could kind of hit that point, what would be that thing?
That one thing, get strong, either through plyometrics or weight room, and set daily goals, at least weekly goals. Focus on those, not on first, second, or third place.
Awesome. All right, Pete.
I'd say just be cautious of how much pounding you're putting on those athletes so they can last through the season. So I mean, I think wear and tear is something that's always on my mind. And those jumpers, I think about who I'm pulling off the track a lot of times at the end of practice when it's time to cool down and stretch. And kids, I want to jump. And so, yeah, those are the kids that I'm usually trying to, and so to that first year coach, I've had a lot of first year jump coaches, and that's being able to tell an athlete, no, you need to shut it down. And have that longer, kind of be able to see the bigger picture rather than, you don't need the PR on a Tuesday afternoon in March.
Brad?
For new coach, know who you're working with. I mean, are you working with a senior who's been around the block a couple times and is really strong? Or are you working with a freshman who's never triple jumped before? He's coming from the middle school. Just know who you're working with and be careful.
Kevin?
Always learn, be a student of the event. I learn stuff all the time. And, Glenn mentioned it, go to clinics and workshops. I try to learn. So one of the big disadvantages I have, I never jumped. I mean, I was a 400, 800, 1600 guy in high school. And so I've never jumped. I've never done the triple jump. And so I've coached it for 30 years, but I never have actually done it. And so for me, it's learn anything I can from everyone. There's, don't be, I think sometimes when you're a younger coach, especially, you kind of have this fear of, if I ask for help or if I ask for advice or if I, then it shows I'm weak and I'm not good at, but the best coaches learn all the time. So I'm always looking for new ideas and new techniques, and YouTube's a great thing too. I mean, I'll watch YouTube videos and see what other people do. It's there's nothing wrong with that. I think it makes you a better coach.
All right, Johnny, you're wrapping it up.
Yeah, I would say just keep it simple. Keep it as simple as you can. Have a handful of drills that the kids can actually learn, and then work on those drills, hang your hat on those drills, and don't do too much. I see, I see a lot of coaches, especially at meets, a kid will have an attempt and then it's, hey, focus on these 6 things on your next one. The coach is saying, make sure you work on this, make sure you work on that. Oh, and by the way, this was a little haywire. And it's like, man, don't say anything to them at all or give them one thing. So that way they can compute. And I think a lot of times too, especially with triple jump, I think a lot of coaches look and see, hey, I kind of liken it to like, fitness and exercise. You get online, you get on social media, and you see all these influencers, and so you try to incorporate all that stuff into your own fitness routine. And if kids can't learn drills, then they're never going to get any better at the thing that the drill is trying to help them out with. So keep things simple, especially with your drills.
Jake, I got one more thing. For a new coach, if you're going to Anacortes and your kid can't make the pit, bring some spray paint and just paint a new line on the runway to make sure they can make the pit. That's what I would say to every new coach.
Wow.
So
fantastic advice.
And then drive the bus home.
Or athletic tape.
Or athletic tape.
Maybe not as permanent, just the thing. Anyways, all right. Well, I really appreciate this. And, when John and I talked about doing this podcast, we just constantly talked about like how much, again, this county is just fortunate and unique and so awesome. And Glenn, I can't thank you enough for jumping on here. And I mean, I could do an entire podcast just listening to some of the stories you were telling. And so, one, thanks for coming on. Second, thanks for sharing those things. And third, you're a constant at our track meets, and you are a part of what our county meets are and what our league meets are, and you're invested in the community. And it's awesome. And I really appreciate it. And as somebody who's not a Skagitonian, by birth, I've moved into this, and I can't be more appreciative of the track community, and you're direct reflection of that. So So appreciate that, and thanks for jumping on with us and sharing all those things. And I, at this point, we're going to wrap our roundtable up. And if anybody's got any last points, that's great. Otherwise, we're good to rock and roll.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. You guys are doing a fabulous thing here. So, but the last little thought that I always had was ask yourself, why am I doing this drill? What is it? How is it helping these kids? We got to always double check ourselves. But thank you very much.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks, Glenn.
No, bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.